Well, we kick off today's show with our weekly series Flashpoints with our CBS News national security analyst, Juan Zarate. And Juan, there's an awful lot to talk about.
A lot.
We will start, though, with the resignation of the Director of National Intelligence, Dennis Blair. We kind of thought this was coming after the Christmas Day failed attack, but what's behind this and what does it mean?
Well, I think the writing was on the wall, Bob. There was a divide between Denny Blair and the White House, a divide between him and those who were purportedly reporting to him, like Leon Panetta and other elements of the intelligence community. I think there was personality friction, some bureaucratics involved. And I think the December 25th event really drew a divide because that's where you saw Denny Blair coming out publicly, talking about the White House not coordinating well with him. It started to build some suspicions. And at the end of the day, the White House just didn't like him. And this was convenient timing because you had the Senate Intelligence Committee report talking about the failures, the intelligence failures from December 25th. So this was a way of the White House sort of clearing the decks from a personality perspective, but also appearing to hold somebody accountable. So it came at an interesting time for the White House and a good time for them.
It's a tough job, though. No matter who takes his place, you still have this problem of trying to oversee all these disparate agencies.
Well, absolutely. And one of the key questions that's emerging now, you hear in the analyst community, is whether the DNI, whether the intelligence reform that this position represents. And you know, this is a difficult job, and I think those who've argued that this signals the end of the position, I think, are overstating it a bit. We've got 16 large intelligence agencies with different responsibilities in terms of collection and analysis and producing things for policymakers. That's got to get coordinated somehow. And the 9/11 Commission pointed out the CIA director, which was responsible for this before 9/11, just wasn't doing the job, couldn't do the job, given the role that he has as CIA director. So somebody has to coordinate all of these elements, which are huge elements, over 100,000 people, over a $50 billion budget. Somebody's got to coordinate that to make sure we're using our intelligence resources properly. It's a tough job, though, and you've got to have the right personalities. The other thing I would note, Bob, is this comes at a difficult time in terms of national security. We've got Iran, North Korea, Afghan, PAC border region, problems in Iraq, terrorism problems coming from diverse sources. So the White House has to move quickly here to get somebody in place because there are a lot of problems on the horizon that we've got to deal with.
All right, you just ticked off one of the problems, Iran and nukes. Are we going to have sanctions? How tough are they going to be? And Iran's kind of playing a game here too, saying if you go with sanctions, we're going to forget about sending some of this stuff out of the country.
Yeah, this is a little bit of three-dimensional chess matched with jiu-jitsu diplomatically. I think what you saw the U.S. try to do this week was to signal that we're still on the path to pressuring Iran so that they aren't able to pursue nuclear enrichment. The problem with the deal that was made between Brazil, Turkey, and Iran is the fact that it doesn't do anything really to stop the Iranians from enriching. It goes back to the original offer made back in October, which was really a confidence-building measure. And the Brazilians, for example, have held this out as some great diplomatic victory. And I think the Americans, Europeans were very frustrated with this because it really muddied the waters, didn't get to the substance of our concerns about a potential nuclear program in Iran, and it created a third kind of leverage in terms of diplomacy where everything had been driven by the U.S. and some of the European powers, and now you had the Brazilians and the Turks getting involved.
Kind of a PR move of sorts by Iran.
It is. Clearly, the Iranians are smart. People need to remember that. The Persian Empire once existed. These people know how to negotiate. They know how to mix things up. And I think, unfortunately, our administration has gotten us into a bit of a box here. We've gotten into a tangling over sanctions and what's going to come out of the UN instead of focusing on the substance. And the substance has gotten muddied, especially after the revelation in Qum, where it was revealed they had the secret site. I mean, this was, in some ways, they had been caught red-handed diplomatically. And we weren't able to convert that into tougher sanctions or tougher international measures. Now we're caught in this diplomatic jiu-jitsu, and we're going to have to see what comes out of the UN. I'm not all that hopeful that China and Russia, at the end of the day, are going to agree to the kinds of tough measures we need to get Iran to reconsider their nuclear program.
Quick follow on Russia. Russia's on board with sanctions, but at the same time, they're still going to send some missiles? Explain that.
Well, this is the problem you always have, and the quandary with the Russians. The Russians play a little bit of both sides of the game. They're willing to go along internationally when the momentum's there, when it seems they have to be a legitimate player, and so they're willing to go along with softer sanctions. On the other hand, they still have their own interests at play. And so they've got their economic interests, they've got their defense industry interests. They export, for example, defense systems to places like Syria and North Korea and Iran. And so that's problematic. And so they play both sides of the game, as does China.
Okay, the Korean Peninsula. The conflict's been going on now since the 50s. Now we have another flashpoint because the South Koreans say they have evidence that it was a North Korean torpedo, if I'm right,
Yep.
that took down that ship. So what happens from here? Are these countries on the verge of fighting here?
Well, just at one point, we talked about this in the Flashpoints with Bob Schieffer about a month ago. I said we've got to watch this very carefully because this could bring us to the brink of conflict. But the problem here is you've got an act of war, the firing of a torpedo by the North Koreans,
sinking of a ship. Yeah.
and the killing of almost 50 South Korean sailors. At the same time, the responsible countries, South Korea, the U.S., Japan, don't want to go to war. And so the question is, what are the consequences for a country like North Korea for taking what is in essence an act of war without bringing the world to the brink of war?
And there might not be any. I mean, it's a possibility, right?
Well, there may not be any. I think the South Koreans want to push on a couple fronts. One, they want to stop some of the economic aid and some of the remittances coming out of South Korea into North Korea. That'll hurt North Korea from an economic perspective. They want to go to the UN, and they want to have a symbolic gesture, maybe a new resolution that blames North Korea, that has North Korea taking ownership of this problem. And then finally, I think they want to see more effective implementation of the existing sanctions, things like shipboardings, things like going after assets of the North Koreans abroad. And so I think you're not going to see bellicosity coming out of South Korea, but you are going to see steps where they're going to want to see something happen, because otherwise you're going to have North Korea and other countries that are watching, like Iran, start to take a lesson that they can bring the legitimate world to the brink and be as aggressive and bellicose as they want without facing any real consequences.
And that's really kind of the problem.
Right.
Okay, Indonesia. Some of the best victories in the fight against international terrorism have come in Indonesia, but now there's a problem there again. What's going on there?
Well, the Indonesians have, since the last bombings at Western hotels, have been underway with a number of counterterrorism actions. It's been happening under the radar screen. It's part of the reason I wanted to raise it on Flashpoints. A number of very important raids. But it raises the question, are the Indonesians facing a new kind of threat? Are they facing an evolution of the threat that was once thought to be abated? I think that's overstating the problem. I think the Indonesians are doing a very good job of going after the cells that they've identified. They just uncovered another militant plot to attack on Independence Day on August 17th to try to overturn the government. So the threats are real, but the Indonesians are doing a good job of disrupting it, which goes to show that countries that are capacitated, have the will, can actually take care of some of these problems on their own.
And they've taken out some of the top terror operatives there in recent months.
Yeah, Dumatin, Nurdin Top, some of the big guys that they've been looking for, they've gotten.
Okay, now this is maybe a little bit odd. We normally talk about terrorists and things like that, but you also had a point you wanted to make about the new Miss USA?
That's right.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Okay.
Part of it is we want to end on a light note because we're always talking about something very
this hasn't been all cheery
pessimistic,
yet,
right? And the story of Rima Faki is a great one, a great American success story, the first Arab Muslim American woman to win the Miss USA title. The reason it matters in the context of national security is a couple things. One, we've been at a point where the American Muslim community has felt a little bit besieged with all these terrorism cases involving American Muslims, from the Times Square bomber to the Major Hassan case to the Northern Virginia individuals who went to Pakistan to try to fight, to the Somali Americans who've gone to fight in East Africa. There's been kind of an onslaught of very negative messaging and negative feelings in the community about the image of American Muslims, not only in the U.S. but abroad. And this really breaks with it. It breaks with it in a very dramatic and sexy way, and in a way that really gives the community a sense of pride, actually. The other thing that's interesting, Bob, is one of the key things that the extremists are trying to do abroad, and we've seen this with Anwar al-Awlaki, the American Yemeni cleric, is to try to divide American Muslims from their country, trying to say, you need to fight against the American government because it's a bad government, it's fighting against Muslims.
You're really
around the
not
world.
part of it.
Right.
You're a stranger. Yeah.
Right. What this event does in a very interesting and symbolic way is it creates a divide between that extremist message and the American Muslim community. Even the conservative Muslim community, which may not like women scantily clad in lingerie or bathing suits, But they have a great deal of pride to have one of their own, a woman from Dearborn, Michigan, born in Lebanon, come to the U.S. to actually ascend to a point of being recognized as the most beautiful woman in America and representing America. That's very different from the message of the extremists. And I think we should take full advantage of this. And we should praise her, and we should hope that she wins Miss Universe and say, that's America.
You know, it takes a razor-sharp analyst to take North Korea and Iran and Miss USA and put it all in one package.
I love ending on this.
Juan, it's been fun.
Thanks, Bob.